Hello and welcome. Today's topic is our development of the GI tract. As you know, this GI tract develops from the primitive gut. And what is primitive gut? I talked about in my earlier videos, you can check those. It extends from the buccopharyngeal membrane up to the cloacal membrane. What is buccopharyngeal membrane? You already know that. What is cloacal membrane? You already know that. Now, extra knowledge point for you that this buccopharyngeal membrane and cloacal membrane are the special region of the embryo where endoderm presents opposite to the ectoderm, but in middle there is nothing. So in between there is no mesoderm. So remember, these buccopharyngeal membrane and cloacal membrane, these are special area of embryo. Anyway, primitive gut grows and communicates with yolk sac via vitelo-intestinal duct, okay, which is also known as yolk stalk. I already talked about that in my early videos, you can check those. Also, it communicates with the allantoic diverticulum. Okay, try to understand our GI tract has three parts: foregut, midgut, hindgut. Okay, so this foregut presents in the head fold and the hindgut presents in the tail fold. Now, how this fold formation? You already know that in the folding of the embryo stage, okay, which I talked about in my earlier videos. Anyway, the part connects with the yolk sac through the vitelo-intestinal duct, which gradually converts into midgut. Okay. Now this vitelo-intestinal duct disappears within 5th week of intrauterine life. Okay. Now this buccopharyngeal membrane separates the stomatum from the foregut, and the cloacal membrane separates the hindgut from the proctodeum. Okay. Now the allantois opens into the caudal part of the hindgut, which is also known as cloaca. Now this cloaca divides itself into two parts due to the presence of urorectal septum in the middle. So it divides into primitive urogenital sinus anteriorly and primitive anorectal canal posteriorly. Urorectal septum also divides cloacal membrane into two parts. One is urogenital membrane anteriorly and anal membrane posteriorly. So this is the overall development of the GI tract. Now, step by step. Now you have to understand how the esophagus develops. It develops from the foregut. So the lower part of the pharynx we get laryngotracheal groove, which I will talk about later in the lungs chapter, not here. Now this laryngotracheal groove which forms the tracheobronchial septum. What is this? It is also will talk about in the lungs chapter, not here. Now try to understand, the lower part of the pharynx converts into tracheobronchial diverticulum due to the presence of this tracheobronchial septum. Okay. Now this diverticulum divides itself into two parts. One is ventral part, which ultimately forms the trachea. Ventral means anterior. So trachea presents in our body anteriorly. And the dorsal part, which converts into esophagus. So esophagus presents in our body posteriorly. Now this esophagus elongates gradually. Anyway, now you have to understand the development of the stomach. Stomach develops during the 4th to 5th week of intrauterine life due to the fusiform dilation of the distal part of the esophagus. Now this fusiform sac has ventral border and dorsal border. Now this ventral border converts into greater curvature. Okay, ventral border overgrows and forms greater curvature, and it is attached with the ventral mesentery. Okay, what is mesentery? I talked about in my anatomy videos, you can check those. Dorsal border overgrows and converts into lesser curvature, which is attached with the dorsal mesentery. Okay, anyway, this ventral mesentery, it forms the greater omentum, and the dorsal mesentery forms the lesser omentum, which presents in our abdomen. What is this omentum? I talked about in my earlier videos. Now this greater curvature and lesser curvature, these are the part of the stomach. Okay, so we are getting the overall stomach, and it has left and right surface. Now this stomach goes through rotation stage. First of all, 90-degree clockwise along with the axis. First of all, left surface becomes the anterior. It was left, now it become anterior. Now the right surface become posterior. Suppose this is the stomach. So the left surface is going 90-degree clockwise. Okay, clockwise. So this 90-degree rotation, the left surface becomes the anterior, the ventral, and which was the right surface, it is automatically become the posterior. Okay. Now this greater and lesser curvature also shift due to the 90-degree rotation. Now around the anterior-posterior axis, what happens? Cephalic end, the part of the stomach presents towards the head. This cephalic end moves towards the left, and it becomes the cardiac part. Okay, and the caudal end, which presents towards the foot, This caudal part of the stomach moves towards the right and becomes the pyloric part. Now, development of the duodenum. Due to the rotation of the stomach, this midline duodenum also shifts towards the right side. Now, the initially duodenum, it is connected with the dorsal mesentery except the proximal part, because the proximal part is a part of the foregut and it is the continuation part of the stomach. Now, the entire duodenum goes to the zygosis stage. What is zygosis stage? We'll talk about later in physiology chapter, not here. Due to this zygotic stage, this duodenum becomes the permanently retroperitoneal structure. It means this duodenum presents behind the peritoneum. What is peritoneum? I talked about in my earlier videos, you can check those. Now this all the special cells. Oh, 1 minute. In the stomach video, I have to say that all types of glands present in the stomach develops from the endoderm at 3rd month of the intrauterine life. Okay, same to same, all the special types of cells present in the duodenum develops to the 8th week of intrauterine life. Okay, now this duodenum continues as a small intestine. Now you have to understand how the intestines develops. Okay, intestine develops from the midgut, as I already told you that, as it is the suspended with the dorsal mesentery, the posterior mesentery from the posterior abdominal wall. So it communicates with the yolk sac via vital intestinal duct. I already told you that. Now this intestine undergoes 270-degree rotational stage to adjust its length, because intestine is very lengthy structure. So our abdomen area is very small. The abdominal cavity is very small. So it needs multiple layer and coil formation. Okay. At the center of the midgut, there is our superior mesenteric artery. Okay. Now, above to this superior mesenteric artery, we are getting pre-arterial segment of the midgut, and below to the superior mesenteric artery, we are getting the post-arterial segment. First of all, we are getting the 90-degree rotation. It is the first rotation of the midgut, which is placed in the horizontally, anti-clockwise. Okay, not this clockwise, anti-clockwise. Anyway, now due to this rotation, pre-arterial segment comes to the right side and post-arterial segment comes to the left side. Okay, now this pre-arterial segment elongates to form the jejunum and ileum. Now after elongation of the jejunum and ileum, this part again goes to the 90-degree anti-clockwise rotation for the second time. Okay, and this jejunum and ileum goes to the posterior to the superior mesenteric artery. Now in the left side we are having post-arterial segment of the midgut, which undergoes 3rd anti-clockwise rotation around the superior mesenteric artery, and it comes to the right side again. So this part elongates and forms the cecum and appendix and presents in the right iliac fossa. Ileum enters into the cecum at ileocecal junction. It forms the ileocecal junction at the end of the 6th week of intrauterine life. Okay. Now another point. At the beginning of the 5th week of intrauterine life, we are getting the hindgut, which elongates and forms the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and sigmoid colon. Okay, that's it, up to sigmoid colon. Now, distal part of the hindgut, which communicates through the allantois, and it forms the cloaca. Okay. Now, this cloaca divides itself into two parts. One is anterior, the ventral broad urogenital sinus, and dorsal narrow primitive rectum. Now, this dorsal narrow primitive rectum converts into urorectal septum, and this ultimately forms the rectum and anal canal. Along with these things, we are also getting cloacal membrane, which divides itself into two parts. Anterior urogenital membrane, which is a part of the urogenital sinus, and posterior anal membrane. Anterior urogenital membrane converts into urinary bladder and urethra, and this posterior anal membrane, which covers the anal canal, it perforates at the end of the 9th week of intrauterine life, and the anal canal establishes. Okay, so among these, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, anal canal, urinary bladder, urethra, all these things I talked about in my earlier anatomy videos, you can check those. So this is the overall development of the GI tract. I hope you will understand, and see you in the next video. Till then, bye.